Hi everyone, my name is Philipp Meissner. Welcome to What's Next. Today we're diving into a crucial topic that keeps the world and everything we do moving: energy. Joining us is Enass Abo-Hamed, an entrepreneur, board trustee at the Royal Academy of Engineering and a member of the External Advisory Board at Airbus. If you're curious about the future of energy and climate in an age of AI, this conversation is for you. So Enass, what makes you so passionate about energy?
That's a great question to kick off this podcast. So what makes me passionate about energy? Energy is the number one traded and consumed commodity, crude oil, a form of energy in the world. And it really defines our ability to do anything from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep. And that also reflects on our progress, our progression as nations, our opportunities, and what's possible and what's not. Energy is the number one enabler for moving forward towards a future that is progressive, and we have a lot of issues around it and challenges that actually needs thinking, structuring, and that on its own, with the opportunities that it creates, I feel extremely passionate about it, given its importance and where it sits at the priority list of its importance.
That's wonderful. And we will definitely dive into both the opportunities and the challenges. So passion is a great driver of change, but so is necessity. And one of the biggest forces shaping energy demand today is AI. There's been a lot of debate around the huge energy needs of AI. How does this technology drive the demand for energy?
It's a very trendy question, and it's a very important to be asking in 2025. As we start thinking about how our world is changing given all of the development of AI that we're just starting to consume. And there are a few parts to answer these questions. First part is the development of AI. What does that mean in terms of energy consumption? There's a huge amount of development around artificial intelligence, agenting, artificial intelligence, LLMs, frontier models. All of that development is power hungry. And regardless of where you get the power from, today we're pressing ahead with the development. There's no delay on that. So demand for power is increasing, and it's not because the global population is increasing. It's because of development of AI. The development of AI is one side, one part of the answer. The usage of AI is another part. The more you use it, the more power you consume as well. And so there is a race towards super intelligence. There is really driving huge demand for power, but also we're becoming bit by bit reliant on AI and using it, right? I use ChatGPT, Perplexity, DeepSeek, all of them. If I don't like the answer on one platform, I move to the other. That's slightly not a good example in terms of wastage, but I want the best answer. It's just like an example of, and most of my friends are very similar. I learned it from my friends. What that means is that, our consumption to AI is also increasing because we now can get better answers to questions that we have, can perform some tasks better. And that all reflects on power consumption that is increasing. But also, our basic needs or the increasing population or the traditional reasons for increasing in power demand, they didn't stop. So you have demand on top of demand that is increasing. That is promising if we had the right ability to meet demand. Scary if we don't.
So when you look at AI, infrastructure is also a big part. The data centers are mostly built in the US. I think 50% of the data centers are built in the US. And as you mentioned, it's a big priority for many governments, including the US. Where's the energy for these data centers mainly coming from in the US?
We would not be saying the truth if we said that 100% of the electric power that powers data center comes from clean electrons. Some of it is clean energy, is powered by clean energy, and some projects are very fixated on that. and some are not. The US have committed to adding 80 new gas-fired plants to generate around 46 gigawatts added capacity just to meet demand that comes from energy needed for AI development and consumption. That's a capacity that fulfills the demand for a country like Norway. So just to give you a feel on the increasing demand that is directly going towards powering data centers that are needed for AI development consumption. So since you asked specifically about the US, 50% of the data centers worldwide are located today in the US, but also that reflects on the advancement, how high the US scores when it comes to developing AI.
Yes.
Most of the LLMs that we know and we use are developed in the US. There is definitely a reason for why you need so much data center to be positioned geographically in the US. Germany, the country that you come from, the data centers accounts for between 4 to 5% out of all the data centers worldwide. That doesn't mean that Germany is not progressive enough or doesn't have the demand. Maybe it means that it hasn't invested enough so far, and that might change in the future. But Germany has one of the highest concentrations of data center in Europe, for example. So 5% is a high number for Europe. And, China, I think we will know more in the future, maybe in the next 5 years, about the development plans in terms of integrating more data centers and how to put a percentage on that in comparison to other countries in the world, but it's behind the US for sure.
So you also mentioned before that we not only have increasing demand by technology, but also just by nations developing, like India, Africa are developing extremely quickly now. This will also lead to growing demand for energy in the next decade. How can we make sure that we scale the green technologies that we have and that are needed to actually fuel this growth?
You're asking a very difficult question. The reason why it's a difficult question, like to give you an accurate answer for, is that firstly, data centers are not only used for AI. They're used for cloud computing services, data, connectivity. The demand for that also grows. When Africa and India need more energy to develop as nations for developmental causes and reasons, when you add the technology to that, there's a huge shift. And I really hope that, somebody will have a very good answer for this question in terms of how do we design the path of development that is fair, but also meets growth targets and demand for development, general development, basic development, economical development, and also technological development. I think at the moment, it's hard to answer this question with very well measured, very well studied data, because the development pace is not easy to measure anywhere, even in countries like the US. There's just so much of it happening all the time, and a lot of change that is being shown as an output. Going back to developing countries, specifically focusing on countries like India and Africa, I think that there'll be peak demands, but there might be also opportunities there for different type of development that is slightly accelerated. One thing that we should not forget is the need to actually make sure that development is green, is accelerated and pushed in the right direction to not get the reverse effect with climate if it was fast accelerated development with emissions that are very difficult to counter later down the line.
So there are many technological solutions for this. When I work with companies, many people are optimistic about new technologies such as small modular reactors or fusion. What's your perspective on these technologies?
You're only giving me good questions today. The reason why this question is very important is a very important discussion point, actually, because AI development and consumption is distinguished by its pace, which is very fast. Now, when you say we're going to power it by something that takes many years to develop and commercialize and make it a commodity and that is integratable and responds to demand, I think I personally struggle to match these two. The demand is now, and you have a race to secure power contracts for data centers for, 10 years, 15 years down the line today, and say small nuclear reactors are a fantastic solution, but they will be ready in 2032, 2035. You can't match the demand of today, which is huge, with something that is not ready to respond to that demand for 10 years. So I would exclude that as a viable solution to use right now because it's not ready. I would not exclude it as a solution with huge potential, very positive about the possibilities and the sustainability that small modular reactors could bring to the whole demand effect around data centers. But it's not a solution that we can buy today, which means it's more of we need to have this conversation again in 10 years' time, and I might have a better answer.
No, it's a great answer, I think. So it's a technology that we shouldn't bet on right now for the consumption of the next 5-7 years. But there's a lot of promise in new energy technologies. Yet we seem to see slow progress in adaptation, in the build out. Why isn't the transition happening faster?
What I would say to this is that it's not only that the transition is not happening faster, we're seeing some regression in some areas, in some geographies, impacted by demand, geopolitical issues, and cost prices of alternatives. It seems like big energy companies are moving their confidence towards what used to be, the energy of yesterday instead of the bet, or what needs to happen for adoption to move towards a steady energy transition. And that means that you just see less effects, maybe better returns to shareholders for energy companies, but certainly in terms of energy transition targets and progress towards that, we're not in a good place. We need a different level of commitments. Although we have clear targets, commitments needs to come with the ability to absorb the cost that it takes to transition from something that it didn't exist, it didn't scale to where we need to be. Otherwise, we're always going to be late.
And what are some of the biggest blind spots in today's energy conversation?
In my opinion, it is becoming very common to present things in an optimistic lens instead of saying that actually we haven't done enough to meet the targets that we have set for ourselves. And when you're unable to, bring accountability to a conversation or agree on what accountability means. So when you set targets, you don't reverse based on, political moods in various places. Or economical favorism for short-term returns, because climate change is the biggest problem of our generation, and we might still be able to solve it with the right levels of commitments, but that should be actioned at a completely different pace to what we're seeing today. And I think that the blind spots is that when we present things at big climate conferences, we don't talk about what we're not doing very well, right? I think the optimism in the presentation is allowing us not to hold ourselves accountable to the things that we should be doing and we're not.
Hi there. Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying What's Next and find value in these conversations, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to subscribe or follow the podcast. It's the best way to make sure you never miss an episode, and it helps us bring more incredible insights to you. Your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being part of this journey. So you can answer this question in an optimistic or pessimistic way, depending on how you see fit. What do you think the energy ecosystem will look like in 2035?
So maybe to follow on the answer from the past question, there's a lot of room for optimism for the energy system to look better in a decade. Actually, 10 years is a good enough amount of time for change to happen and to be measured. So a wishful vision, I'd say that, we'd commit to change and would accept economical cost to build the right energy systems that normally is shaped by demand and growth. So we need to commit to demand creation and acceptance of economic cost that enables shaping an energy system in 2035 that is less emitting, that is more efficient in terms of integrating AI and all the advanced technologies that allows to measure, monitor, and enable really reducing emissions, but also increase productivity and also enable increasing profitability through data and knowledge and intelligence that you could predict and trade.
Some people say that the world's biggest problems are the world's biggest opportunities. So energy seems to be a big problem, which enables a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurship, right? So in which areas do you see maybe the biggest opportunities for entrepreneurship in the energy space?
I think where there is a huge amount of demand, data center, AI infrastructure, where there's a huge amount of demand and you don't need to create market demand, and where you have a matching solution that not only addresses demand, but also like have a viable business model behind it and measured output in terms of reducing emissions. The combination of or aggregate of, end-to-end, small technologies pieced together could well be exciting for innovators and entrepreneurs to come into the space and build it or grow it.
Is there any particular sector that you're excited about? Is there any particular technology?
Cooling technologies for data center, which is like 40% of the cost of data center. So making that efficient or more efficient or less costly is a really interesting area. As an example, transformers for data centers, and I think building the infrastructure on its own is fascinating given the projected growth, which is not one technology but aggregating many of them together. How you do that in the most innovative way that you meet demand is a huge opportunity.
And what should governments do to accelerate the adoption of these new clean technologies?
It's great that we're talking about the role of government here, because we've outsourced it to the investment community to invest in new technologies. And we're not really satisfied by the outcome of that. Firstly, if you leave it to business would like to work at its optimized level and work with the usual scenario, invest less and generate more returns. So climate change needs to be driven by policy. It's a policy change rather than really directs business to work in a specific way and meet targets. We've really outsourced creating new climate technologies to the venture capital market, for example. It follows metric, that could work really well for fintech or SaaS models. If you take these metric and try to apply them to climate, you won't be able to. It's more expensive. You're talking about a lot of climate inventions or technologies, hardware technologies that, needs to be scaled. There'll be loss before profit. And that model doesn't sit very well with the, venture capital, maybe private equity community. But the question is it their role really to drive change like that? Or change like that needs to be orchestrated by government or governments around the world? And when the unit economics really happen, that's where you have a lot of place for the private investment mechanism to kick in. Maybe then we can expect different pace. But I do believe that governments here have a central role to play. There are countries that are more progressive than others. There are some efforts that, one needs to acknowledge and recognize, but I don't think it's enough.
And if you had a wish list, top 3 measures that governments should put into place to make this transition easier, quicker?
Financing support, putting framework for, new technologies, collaborations with big industry players. We have innovation happening one end without scaling capability, and at the other hand, you have scaling capability without innovation that moves at a fast pace. Maybe the government could be the facilitator of collaborations with incentives to both sides, and everybody wins. And third one would be perhaps, a procurement support for those who create solutions, and demand needs to be grown at pace. And there need to be some favorism of buying new technologies and testing them to scale them at pace.
So the government as a buyer, essentially, not only as giving financial support, but particularly as a customer, as a buyer for these new solutions.
Yeah.
Okay. And imagine that you're like a company and you really want to drive this transition forward. Are there any things that executives can do? Is it that go beyond maybe installing solar on the roof, which many have already done?
You know, the usual, every executive will have different capacities and rules to play based on their field. But if you're leading an organization and you have the power to introduce new policies, that facilitates, more efficiency in your business, but also more focus on emission reductions. There are many companies that are very progressive at that because of their leaders. How who you buy from as suppliers. Are you encouraging suppliers to be sustainable? How do you engage your employees and increase their awareness? So the collective, if it's a large company, so the collective output as a corporate or as an organization is improving towards reducing emission year by year. Are you setting targets together with your employees to achieve that? So I think it's a process where, based on what type of executive and what you want to achieve and how important to you is, making an impact directly and indirectly within an organization matters to you.
And if you had to bet on one breakthrough technology that could really change the energy game, which one would it be?
Fusion fission, what's always been the,
hope.
The hope, obviously, like once it's ready and it's integratable, easy to adopt, in industry and at scale. I think we not need to have conversation like these at all, because then we will really have the ultimate solution for reducing carbon emissions. So there needs to be a huge amount of work and support for these type of technologies, although we acknowledge that they're not ready today. If they are in our future, that changes. I mean, I would answer all of the questions that you asked me very differently. So that is definitely a very strong, promising technology.
Yeah, and there are many people working on this right now. Maybe we can hope for some breakthroughs fairly quickly. And what I read the other week is that you can also retrofit, I think, gas power plants based on this new technology, so that it could also be implemented quite quickly without needing to redo the entire grid infrastructure and all of this once the fusion technology is actually ready.
Maybe we need to take more brilliant people who are working in another field that is less urgent and direct them toward a field like that its impact can really be game-changing to our future and the health of the planet that we're going to get in the next few years.
Yeah, so we need more climate tech entrepreneurs like you.
And climate scientists. And maybe some should work in the government, some of these should work in business. And I think a collaborative approach between people who are aligned on why we really need to be tackling this and attack climate change with all the science and energy that we have, how positive the outcome of that.
So you personally are a very successful entrepreneur in the climate space. What would you say are your biggest learnings from building a climate tech company?
I think resilience is one that has been very effective. You'd find a lot of entrepreneurs who go on a long journey and achieve, some of the targets or milestones that the business needed, that they start their journey being very impatient. And impatience is a big advantage because it allows you to push yourself constantly towards something that you don't have and you want to achieve. But when you're building something that not many people built before you, or if at all, you're faced with enormous amount of challenges. Reassure yourself or the people who you hire that actually you're going to be different and you're going to build something that nobody else did. And that is very, very difficult. And you'll have days where you doubt yourself and you'd ask yourself the question whether that is possible or not. And resilience allows you to have another day on the journey and another day and another day until until you hit your milestone or you reach to where you want it to be. And I've learned that the value of resilience is, I'd rate it on the top 3 values. And without it, it's really hard to actually continue on difficult journeys. Not every business is extremely challenging. Some are more challenging than others. But if you embark on a journey where you want to build something that nobody else built before, it's hard to imagine that you'd be not resilient and get somewhere far.
Absolutely. And what is the most valuable piece of advice that you have received as a founder?
I love this question. The most valuable advice was to ask people for advice and not always listen to it. Actually, I think that was a brilliant one, because it's so easy to advise you to do something, but it's your responsibility, whatever decision you make, right? You can never sue an advisor for advice or do anything. After you've taken an advice, it's your responsibility. So sometimes you need to hear many voices that are not your voice, but form a strategy or form a direction and move with it, regardless of the advice. I've taken a lot of advices that, implementing them was a disaster. Other advice that I had was the best thing ever. Some advice that I was given, the best thing to do about it was to do the opposite. It just develop the ability to actually decide which advice to listen to. Always ask for advice, but don't always listen to it, to what comes back.
I think that's a very good piece of advice. So we like to end this show on a positive note. We ask all guests the same question, which is, what makes you optimistic about the future?
Too many things. 2025 has been a very different year from the years that we've seen before. More wars in our lifetime than we've seen at the same time. You come out of a pandemic, you're hit by war after war, and financial markets are a bit hesitant and confused, and a lot of things are changing fast around us. That all doesn't mean that it's negative and it will be like that forever. But I think just being aware that there's change happening and change will need to be countered with a good strategy. There's a huge amount of work to be done to counter anything that we don't like or we feel that, could lead us to the wrong place. And that keeps me optimistic, because developing that awareness and seeing what's done around us that is negative perhaps or unsatisfactory or goes against a rationale of, progressive societies, what we can do about that, keeps me extremely optimistic, because there's a huge amount that we could do about it.
So it's almost a call to action to build like a different path, right?
Yes.
Wonderful way to end this. Thank you so much, Enass, for sharing your insights on what's next in energy in the age of AI, and for giving us and our audience so much to think about. If today's conversation has shown us one thing, it's that energy is at the heart of everything, and the future depends on how we innovate today. So stay curious and stay with us for more insights on what's next.
Thanks, Philip.